Hi, I have no clue what I'm doing, but I'm going to try to explain what I did. And by explain, I mean talk over a slideshow of videos and photos of me making my Elsa dress. So, 10 years ago, I started my cosplay journey. I didn't know what cosplay was back then, and I wouldn't even call this a cosplay at all. It was a Halloween costume. I was 13 years old. I was still very much deeply entrenched in my Wicked era. And when Frozen came out within that year, I immediately loved that. Basically, Elphaba and Elsa are voiced by the same person, and for all intents and purposes are very similar. And so I really wanted to be her. But when you are a middle schooler, and an overweight one at that, stores don't carry Elsa dresses in your size. Growing up in the 2000s and the 2010s, being overweight, not exactly fun, but it did give me sewing skills. I just wanted a dress, and it didn't exist for me. So the only feasible way that I would be able to be Elsa for Halloween was if I made it. With some very generous support from my grandmother, she bought me the supplies, and at this point she had already taught me the basics about sewing. And I made it over a period of about 2 months. I would come home from middle school, which of course everyone in middle school gets bullied, but it's still rough when you're going through it. I would go home and I would work on my costume while listening to Phantom of the Opera, because that's also around the same time I got super into that. Not much has changed. I still finish projects listening to Think of Me and the overture. So, wearing that costume, I wish I had been prouder of myself back then. Because my entire day and every time I wore that to both school and whatever Halloween parties we went to, and there were a good ton, mostly I just felt embarrassed. Because I was a 13-year-old, and when you're 13, that feels old. Like, you shouldn't be wanting to wear princess dresses. You shouldn't be liking Elsa, especially middle schoolers are not exactly the most kind. And so I didn't really tell people I made this dress. And I think that's my biggest regret involving that. I wish I had been more prouder. I wish I had been more vocal about going up to people. It's like, I made this with my own 2 hands. 10 years later, I will not shut up about anything that I am doing. I don't know if that's character growth, but it's definitely character change. But I do know one thing. My middle school self would be in awe of the person that we've become. And so to honor that girl and to call back to where this mostly started, I decided to remake my Elsa costume this year. Learning so much, I wanted to show it off and just see what I could do. This coincided with me losing some weight, a good amount of weight actually. At the beginning of the year, I was about 245. I got on the scale 2 days ago and I'm at 185. To put that in perspective, in my original Elsa outfit when I was in middle school, I weighed 175. So I was not exactly a small middle schooler. I was also fairly tall. So growing up was interesting. That's all I can say. But yeah, I wanted to remake it, and I did. Overall, it took about 3 months of actually making it, even longer to get myself to do it. The design process was very interesting. I had to get very creative because during this time I also was unfortunately let go from a job that I actually really enjoyed. And so my dress, instead of buying new materials, for the most part, I just had to use what was in my stash. So luckily I had accidentally bought like 7 yards of this blue sparkly fabric. It was originally supposed to be green. It looked green in the picture. It came in blue, and then it just kind of sat there for like forever. If you've seen the Fizzerolic outfit, this was the fabric I was supposed to use for it. But it was like blue and not green. And so now it's an Elsa dress. So I don't know what lesson there is to be learned from that, but it worked out. So the thing I wanted most was a beautiful corset, because I like sparkly things. The pattern, I used a truly Victorian sewing pattern. Those are my go-to for sewing patterns, honestly, if I'm not drafting it myself, just because the fit is amazing. Like, it always looks good no matter what my body looks like at this time. This is also the same pattern I used on the Angel Dust corset, if you've seen that. I mean, it's much smaller because my waist has gone down around, I think, 8 inches last I checked. So, yeah, it got smaller. The beadwork, I knew it was going to take forever, so I started that first. The corset itself had to be hand stitched. Like, the individual seams had to be hand stitched because every single one of them had a curve, and it was not going to go well on my sewing machine. It would turn out wonky and weird. And I know that because I've made corsets, and the ones that turned out the best were the ones that I just stitched on by hand. So, yeah, the seams all hand stitched, beads all hand stitched. And I'm gonna be completely honest, I didn't feel like lacing up the back, so when I'm in these photos, I literally stitched myself into the corset. So literally all of it was stitched. Sewed myself into this thing. Anyways, so the base pattern itself actually only took a day. I did it like in a Sunday because it was like the first week of August, and I was like, I gotta start this thing if I want this done by October. And so the corset base, done in a day. The beadwork, took forever. But I think it worked really great. I was inspired a lot by the Broadway Elsa. I wasn't going to recreate that entirely because, again, your girl was on a budget. She was using all the things that were just in her stash and trying to make do. But yeah, it turned out beautiful. Watching it slowly come together, it was amazing. I've been more open with showing my projects to my family just because I've always been a very isolated person, hence why I love Elsa. But I remember showing my dad the corset, and his reaction was, wow, it glows. And it really does. While I was making this thing, through the tears and hours of stitching, watching it come together was beyond satisfying. And I cannot be more proud of it. The little dangly bits, I was inspired by that scene in the movie with the trees that are tangling down, like with the frozen dewdrops on them. And just the sleeves, they just look pretty. The skirt was also a truly Victorian pattern. I used a lot of historic sewing methods specifically for the skirt. I love how it moves. Doing sewing as long as I did, I knew that putting a hem facing on the bottom would make the skirt stick out very similar to how the fabric sticks out in the movie. And so I wanted to replicate that as best I could. So using the sequin fabric that I used inside out because I didn't want sequins on the outside, I did a truly Victorian historical pattern, putting in a hem facing, hand hemmed the thing, and it just floats like a dream. The cape was the only fabric that I bought, like, specifically for this, and it was because it was $1 a yard at this discount fabric store. And it was made the night before, so the cape needs some love. That's going to be a different thing. But overall, I adored this dress, and I loved making it. Now, me personally, I think the biggest character growth I had throughout this entire project was me learning to use a wig cap. It didn't fit correctly, but one was used. Character development. One day I will actually get a wig cap that works. But I will say, I think my favorite moment is when I finally put it all on together. And I saw myself in the mirror. And it was beyond surreal. I do a lot of cosplay, obviously. But whenever I do it, I look in the mirror and I see myself as, oh, I'm dressed up as this character. And that's cool. Like, I'm never, like, disappointed in it. Because I'm like, I look like me dressing up as this character. When I saw myself in the wig, wearing something that highlighted my recent weight loss, I genuinely couldn't recognize myself. But it was still me. It was something that I had created. And it was just so surreal. If you showed my younger self pictures of what we look like today, she wouldn't recognize her. I barely recognized myself. And when you're a cosplayer, seeing yourself as the character, it was a big deal for me. It was the first time I felt like I was genuinely the character, and I kind of played into it for the night. I actually, like, tried to mimic the character a little bit, and I couldn't be prouder. Look at her. I still look at these photos and I have a hard time seeing myself. But it's me. That's who I am. I love her. I always have. I hope I always will. I'm going to try to. I can't wait to see what she'll do in the next 10 years. I can't wait to see how much I grow. And thank you, everyone who's been supportive throughout all of this. If you stuck around this long, thank you. I know the audio is terrible and my editing skills are not better at all. I'm hoping one day I will get better at this part of this. Hopefully. I sew, man. I don't video edit. I make pretty dresses. I don't know how to do this part. But I hope that you'll stick around and continue to support me. I love doing this. I want to continue to make art and share my art. Any support you can give is more than enough.